For decades, Christians have framed the discussion around tabletop games in the wrong way, so I like to provide some of that structure. Let me offer a simple comparison to start. Which is better, a teapot or a hammer? The only sensible answer is for what? Neither object is good or bad by itself. Its value entirely depends on its purpose or its use. A hammer is excellent for driving nails, but it's terrible for pouring tea. I don't even know how you would do that. And tabletop games are similar. They're not moral agents, they don't choose, and they don't sin. They're tools for play and for storytelling. So asking whether a tabletop game is inherently good or evil misses the entire point. The real question is whether they are ordered towards the right ends. Now, for the objector already typing in the comments, it's important to note something here. Human constructs can be evil. A book is a book. It is neither good nor bad in itself, but a book written to advocate for the murder of millions, a book that ridicules God, or a book that rejoices in the torture of others, that can rightly be called evil, not because ink and paper sin, but because such works participate in rebellion against God and in the breakdown of the human soul. So with that in mind, how did Dungeons and Dragons come to be associated with Satanism? Well, in the 1980s, during what's often called the Satanic Panic, there was a widespread cultural uproar surrounding Dungeons and Dragons, and eventually tabletop games more broadly. Now, there was a lot of other things going on at the time, involving rock and roll and drugs and politics. But when it comes to tabletop, some people genuinely believe these games promoted Satanism, witchcraft, and moral corruption. To the public eye, it looked like people were pretending to perform occult rituals. They saw demons on book covers, warlocks casting spells, groups of people meeting in closed rooms, engaging in imaginative play that on the surface appeared morally suspect. Now, not everyone playing was Christian, and perhaps in some of these cases, unhealthy things were happening, but the reaction was definitely out of proportion. As claims that Dungeons and Dragons had influenced murders and suicides were investigated, and as sensationalized stories were debunked, it became clear the panic itself was not justified. That conclusion, however, does not absolve us as Christians in discerning how we play. Scripture still calls us to exercise freedom wisely, to consider what builds others up, to dwell on what is pure and honorable, and to resist being shaped uncritically by the surrounding culture. Now, while many of the original fears may have faded, a careful observer can still identify aspects of modern gaming culture that doesn't align with Christian faith and practice. But this video isn't about how non-Christians ought to play. It's a reflection on what tabletop gaming is and why Christians ought to play. Before we get there, though, we need to address something else. If games are tools, then some tools are misused from the start. As we established earlier, objects are tools. They do not possess moral agency. But when humans imagine and create, sin is never far away. There are games that are simply not God-glorifying uses of time. An easy example of this would be the rise of adult party games. Titles like Cards Against Humanity, Dirty Minds, Joking Hazard, and What Do You Meme? These games usually work the same way. A prompt is drawn, players respond by submitting pre-written cards from their own hand. Now, the issue is not the mechanic, the issue is the content and the aim. These games frequently rely on material that is crude, sexually explicit, blasphemous, cruel, and violent. There is wit here and there is imagination here, but the problem is that those gifts are often ordered towards shock, crudeness, or irreverence, rather than towards what is true, lovely, or commendable. Scripture does not tell us to rehearse darkness so that we can laugh at it. It tells us to dwell on what is true, what is honorable, what is pure, what is lovely, and worthy of praise. Because what we fix our minds on is what shapes us. So why is tabletop gaming a worthy endeavor at all? A crucial feature of tabletop games is storytelling, and storytelling is not trivial. My proof? The Bible itself. God reveals himself through story, through law and poetry, history and prophecy, wisdom and parable. Scripture is a unified narrative of creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. So if God chose storytelling as a fitting vessel for his truth, beauty, and redemption, then it deserves our careful attention. Now, most storytelling requires the suspension of disbelief. Stories, being human creations, can absolutely wander into darkness and even celebrate it. But unpacking that properly deserves its own episode, so we'll leave that for another time. We imagine worlds not our own so that we may better understand the one we inhabit. In fantasy, that means inventing creatures, powers, and places that do not exist. Scripture does not ask us to suspend disbelief. It asks us to believe. But simply repeating biblical events verbatim is not storytelling in the fullest sense. That's testimony. Storytelling emerges when we imaginatively attend to meaning, motive, consequence, and faithfulness. It's the difference between listening to events and entering into them. This imaginative participation is precisely what makes stories both sacred and fictional, makes them formative. Most of us already know this intuitively. We remember campfire stories, films that changed us, games that surprised us with emotional depth, and tabletop sessions people still talk about years later that bring a smile to your face. Yet much modern entertainment is consumed passively and without reflection. Christians are called to something better. Scripture calls us to orient even our leisure towards the God of glory. If storytelling is a gift, then how we participate in stories matters just as much as the stories we consume. Tabletop games are uniquely powerful because they involve shared moral problem solving. Our choices are rarely clean. Players have to weigh competing goods, imperfect information, and real consequences. We're not merely observing ethical tension, we're implicated in it. If you've ever paused at a table with your dice in your hand, knowing the right choice might cost your character something, you already understand. Play also trains self sacrifice. Players limit their own success for the good of the group. They take risks so that others may escape, they share scarce resources, and they allow someone else to shine. Their characters may be fictional, but their posture is not. Tabletop games are formative, not only because of the choices we make, but because we make them together. They require presence, patience, listening, and cooperation. Unlike entertainment optimized for isolation, tabletop play produces shared memories rather than endless content, stories that belong to us, not algorithms. Christians have long understood that formation does not happen only in churches or classrooms, but around tables, through meals, conversation, hospitality, and shared life. At their best, tabletop games fit squarely within that tradition. They are not replacements for discipleship, but they can be spaces where virtue is practiced and relationships are revealed. So, to reiterate, tabletop games are tools. Faithfulness lies in how we use them, and for some, how we design them. That's something I'll be exploring in future video essays. But in the meantime, you know what to do if you'd like to support a new channel. Until then, may God bless your fellowship, your stories, and your play.